housekeeping matter. This is a very large courtroom and it fits a large number of people. Of course, everyone is welcome. However, I would ask, please be respectful to both sides. When they are giving their closing argument, I ask, please, there's no talking at all, because even if there's a few whispers here and there, it's very distracting, and it's not fair for the lawyers who have worked very hard to prepare their closing arguments for today.
Your Honor, can we make sure that the cameras, the monitors in the back are not on, so anything that I may want to use during closing, or just for the court, the jurors, and the defense, and the state?
Sure. Don't the cameras show whoever's speaking?
Yes, I'm sorry. So if he's in the court of speaking, he's only showing that.
So those monitors in the back, if you're speaking, would be showing you.
No, that's okay. I'm just talking about, I'm going to show a video or a photograph.
Okay.
I don't want.
So any documents or video or audio that you're going to be showing, well, not audio, but video or documents, anything that you're using is sensitive and is not to be shown to the audience. Is that correct?
Exactly right. Something that is sensitive.
Okay. Do you want to let us know if it's sensitive, or do you want to?
It's anything that I'm going to use except for one record is sensitive. I'm going to show the video.
I understand. So we'll just make sure the monitors are off for anything that you show.
Okay, that's fine.
Is that?
I thought he was only for that one sensitive.
No, he said everything he's showing is sensitive except one thing.
Oh,
So I can turn it off now then.
so we can.
Thank you.
Lieutenant Jason?
Where's Gabe at?
Are both sides ready to bring in the jurors? Okay. Jurors are entering. jurors are present. Everyone else may be seated. Ladies and gentlemen, the attorneys are now going to have the opportunity to present closing argument. Pursuant to the rules of procedure, the state goes first. State whenever you're ready.
Thank you, Your Honor.
Thank you.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. So, the testimony and the evidence that has been introduced during these proceedings has shown and revealed what happened, what occurred on Valentine's Day, February the 14th, 2018. Exactly what happened. The testimony revealed the unspeakable, horrific brutality and the unrelentless cruelty that the defendant performed in the 1200 building on February the 14th, 2018. It has been said that what one writes and that one says is a window into someone's soul. And some of the remarks the defendant wrote on his YouTube were, "No mercy, no questions, double tap. I'm going to kill a shit ton of people and murder children." And on July the 4th, 2017, "I love to see the families suffer." You're entitled, and I suggest that every YouTube comment, every search, everything that's in evidence, you can review when you're deliberating. And I suggest you take all the evidence, all the videos, all the photographs, all the records back to consider. And look at the comments, the YouTube comments and the searches the defendant wrote and what he searched. Because what one writes, what one says, is a window to someone's soul. What he wanted to do, what his plan was, and what he did was to murder children at school and their caretakers. That's what he wanted to do. That's what he planned to do, that's what he wanted to do, and that's what he did. And he picked Valentine's Day to do it while school was in session. And you could tell by the evidence and the testimony, you've been sitting here and listening to everything, this plan was goal-directed, it was calculated, it was purposeful, and it was a systematic massacre. And this is just not somebody with a high-powered AR-15 rifle shooting people. And I'm going to get into the details, but just to start off with Gina Montaldo and Luke Hoyer and Martin Duque Aquiano. I'm going to go over it, but if you can remember from the start, they were huddling in front of classroom 1214, hiding and wounded. What the defendant The first thing you do is you think about it, and we know from looking at his YouTube comments and his searches, he was certainly thinking about it. In fact, he told, I think it was Dr. Denney or Dr. Scott, that he'd been watching the Columbine when he was 13 or 14 years old, the Columbine shooting. So we know he's been talking about it for a long time and thinking about it for a long time. So what's he do? First thing you do, you want to accomplish something, you research. So he researched. He researched prior mass shootings. So he researched, obviously, Columbine, because he mentioned that when he was 13 or 14. So he looks up the Columbine mass shooting at the school, Charlottesville shooting, the McDonald's mass shooting in San Diego, the Montreal Polytech in Montreal, Canada, the Las Vegas shooting that I mentioned before, the Aurora shooting that I mentioned before, the Aurora, Colorado movie theater, Virginia Tech. He researches the Virginia Tech mass shooting. He looks up Westlake, Minnesota high school shooting, and also the Jakola High School in Finland. He did all that research. And then what else do you do after you do your research? You get all your details in order. Was he detailed? Let's look at what he does. First of all, he already had his AR-15, Smith & Wesson 5.56, M&P 15, serial number TF16214. When did he buy that? He bought that on February, he picked it up on February the 18th, 2017. Almost a year before the murders at Marjory Stoneman Douglas. So he had the gun. So what else do you need now? Now, we know from him speaking to Dr. Denney and Dr. Scott, he made some additions to this gun. He put a bipod on it. And you'll see it. You've seen it. It's in evidence. He put a vertical grip for better balance. And he put a sling on it. So now what do you need for a mass shooting? You need a lot of what? You need a lot of ammunition. You need a lot of rounds. You need a lot of bullets. So it accumulates a lot of bullets. What did he say on the cell phone video? A couple what? Tracer rounds. So we got tracer rounds. What else do you need? If you have bullets and you have a semi-automatic weapon, you have to have a firearm magazine that goes in a firearm magazine well. So it accumulates magazines. And we know from the testimony that he brought 11 firearm magazines to Marjory Stoneman Douglas when he entered the 1200 building. Okay, so now you have that. What else do you need? Well, how long does it take a cop to respond to a school shooting? He researched that. And you can see that, in what's been introduced in his searches. How long does it take for a cop to respond to a school shooting? What else? The bell schedule. Even though he went to Marjory Stoneman Douglas, he downloaded the bell schedule. What else do you need? You need, now you have magazines and you put your bullets in the magazines. How are you going to get these magazines to the school? Well, how about a vest? And the vest has to have a lot of pockets because you're going to put those magazines. And the magazines that are left are in evidence. Feel how heavy just one of them is. Now he's got to get something to keep these magazines, to take them to the school. So he gets this vest that has 10 pockets, pouches, so he can put those magazines, those fully loaded magazines in that vest. Okay, now he's got a vest. You can't wear that vest and just get in the Uber and go to school with that vest. So you have to do what? You have to find a way to transport that vest. So he has a backpack. And what does he do? He puts the vest in the backpack. In the vest are the 10 magazines. 40-round magazines. I think there were 2 40-round magazines, and the rest were 30-round magazines. And he had a 10-round magazine in his pocket. What else? You got to take the gun. You just can't take the gun on Uber. So you may recall that he was searching for a guitar case. He finally wound up with that Cabela bag. All right, so now you got this Cabela bag. You have to figure out what? Something to say to the Uber driver because she may be suspicious. So what does he say to her? I'm going to music class. Explains his instrument that he's taking. So now he has something to transport his rifle, something to transport the vest that contains the magazines. What else? You want to blend in, right? So he gets his JROTC polo shirt to wear. All these details he thought of, and he did. That's exactly what he did. And when he went there, he told the Uber driver he was going to music class. He told the Uber driver, and this is really interesting. You talk about executive function. Remember the mental health experts were talking about executive function. He's on his way to school, to Marjory Stoneman Douglas. He's directing Laura Zucchini. She was the Uber driver. Where to go? Remember, she was going to go straight down and Hamburg Road and cross Pine Island and go to a different exit. No, he didn't want to go there. He knew, first of all, in planning, you have to know where you're going to go. So he wanted to go to the pedestrian gate that's on Pine Island Road. So he directed Miss Lucchini to make a left-hand turn on the Pine Island to go to the pedestrian gate. You also have to research what time you're going to get there. First of all, those gates lock after the students and the teachers go into school, so they have to open up prior to school letting out. But you don't want to get there exactly when school's letting out at 2:40 because you're going to be what? Losing your targets. So he gets there after the gates open and before school lets out at 2:40 because he arrives what? At 2:19. He starts shooting in the hall at 2:21:33. So he did all this research, he did all this thinking, and on the way to Marjory Stoneman Douglas in the Uber, what is he doing? Remember they're talking about executive function? What is he doing? And it's introduced in evidence. Look at it. He is having it's a three-way because he's involved with two other people. He's trying to get and text to Angie Gilmartin, who's not at Marjory Stoneman. She's at another school, and she says, look, I'm busy, I'm at school, I'll talk to you later. And then he's also texting J.T. Jameson Sneed, who he was living with that family, about having a party and having girls over. So he's having this conversation on his way, his texting conversation, to two different people while he's on his way. And he tells J.T. Sneed, what? Can you get the girls there? Where are you going? I'm going to the movies. I'm not going to work. I don't go to school on Valentine's Day. And I'm going to call my employer and tell him I'm not coming, but I'm going to the movies. All the way, on the way to accomplish his plan. So he arrives at Marjory Stoneman Douglas High School at 2:19 p.m. He gets out of the back seat of Mr. Keeney's Uber, I think it was a RAV4, and he directly goes to the 1200 building east exit. You've been there, so you know that's the closest, that pedestrian gate is the closest exit or entrance to the 1200 building. So he goes into the east double doors and immediately makes a right into the east stairwell. And as he takes out his AR-15 style rifle, that Smith & Wesson 5.5 Smith M&P 15, takes it out of the Cabela rifle bag, in walks Christopher McKenna. Christopher McKenna was a student who was in 1216, in classroom 1216. He was out on the pass, and he walks into the stairwell, and face to Nikolas Cruz, and Cruz says to him, you better get out of here, something bad is about to happen. So Christopher McKenna runs, and he goes to get one of the school monitors, Aaron Weiss. So Cruz steps out of the east stairwell, and in the east stairwell now, there are 4 students. Ashley Baez is walking west in the hallway. Gina Montaldo was sitting on the floor. She got permission from her teacher, Miss Matlock, to work on it was more quiet in the hallway, to sit in the hallway right in front of classroom 1215 and work on her computer, and standing beside her, knocking on the door to 1215 to get back into classroom 1215 because they had passes to go somewhere else, was Luke Hoyer and Martin Duque Acquiano. They were students in 1215, and they were knocking on the door to get back in. Cruz steps out of the stairwell, fires and hits in the leg Ashley Baez. And maybe you can remember from the video that she runs across the hall and runs into classroom 1210. He fires at Gina, Luke, and Martin. Then he goes over to classroom 1216. 1216, classroom 1216, if you recall, is the second classroom on the north part of on the north side of the hall. It's the second classroom as you come in the east double doors. So he fires into classroom 1216. It shatters the glass, and he fires and he hits Alex Schachter, who was getting up from his desk. He hits him twice in the chest. Alex was 14 years old, got shot twice in the chest, and he died of his wounds. Cruz fires into 1216, then he walks away right next to 1216. He kneels on the ground. He takes off his backpack. He unzips it and brings out his tactical vest with the 10 magazines in it. He puts the vest on. He takes out the 10-round magazine, lays it on the ground, pulls out a magazine from the vest, and puts a new magazine into the gun. Then he walks over to classroom 1214 and 1215. 1215 is the second classroom on the south side of the hall from the east double door entrance. And on the south side, 1214 and 1215 here, the first classroom coming in is 1218. Then there's 1215, and then there's 1214. And 1214 and 1215 abut, they're right next to each other. And that's where Gina and Luke and Martin are. So he walks up there and fires into them, wounding them. He then fires into classroom 1214, which was the Holocaust class. He hits Helena Ramsey. Helena Ramsey was 17 years old. He shoots her 4 times, killing her. He shoots and kills Nikolas Cruz, who was 17. He shoots and kills him, shoots him 3 times. He wounds Samantha Grady, Samantha Fuentes, Isabel Checker, and Danielle Menescu. Then he walks back to 1216 and fires additional shots into 1216. This time he shoots and kills Elena Petty. Elena Petty was shot 4 times and she died of her wounds. He shoots and kills Alessa Alfadef. She's shot 8 times and she died of her wounds. He also wounded William Olson, Justin Colton, Genesis Valentin, Alexander Durrett, who's the brother of Nicholas Durrett, who was just shot and killed over in 1214, and Keshava Magaporian. So there was 5 people he wounded in 1216. Then he moves west, and as he's moving west, in comes the athletic director, school monitor, Christopher Hickson. He runs through the west doors. And when he runs through the west doors, the defendant, Nikolas Cruz, shoots him twice, once in the torso and once in the leg. Christopher Hickson falls to the ground and crawls over to the north side of the hall to an alcove near the west door and double door entrance. And he's seeking, cover, shelter. The defendant continues west. And when he comes up to 1215 again, he shoots into Gina again, Martin again, and Luke again. And Gina, and you saw the photographs, you remember the testimony of Dr. Osborne, the medical examiner? He did the autopsy on Gina Montalvo. She was shot 4 times, and she died of her wounds. But 2 of those wounds were contact wounds. Contact wounds, which means the end of that M&P 5.56 AR-15 style rifle was right up against her chest and right up on her abdomen. Right on her skin. She was shot 4 times and she died. And she also had what Dr. Osborne called a defensive wound. What's a defensive wound? When someone tries to protect themselves by raising their legs or their hands. Joaquin Oliver had one too, if you'll recall. Gina had a bullet that went through the back of her hand and came out her palm, as if holding up to protect herself. She had a contact wound of her chest and her abdomen. She died of her wounds. And do you remember what one of the YouTube comments from Nikolas Cruz was? Remember? I don't mind shooting a girl in the chest. That's exactly what he did to Gina Montalvo. Then he walks, after he shoots into Luke and Martin and Gina, he proceeds to 1213. Classroom 1213 is the next classroom as you proceed west on the north side of the hall, next to 1216. He fires into 1213, and when he fires into 1213, he shoots and kills Carmen Centro. He hits, one of the shots hit her in the head, and she died of her wounds. He wounds Madeline Wilford, Samantha Mayer, and Benjamin Wickander. Then he proceeds west, and as he's proceeding west, he passes on the north side of the hall Christopher Hickson. And I'm going to show the video. He turns and fires a 3rd shot into Christopher Hickson, and Christopher Hickson died of his wounds. Christopher Hickson was 49 years old. The defendant then walks to the interior door that leads into the west stairwell, and as he enters the west stairwell, here's Aaron Feist. Aaron Feist is a coach, and he was a school monitor that Christopher McKenna ran to get. And Coach Feist opens up the outside door to the west stairwell. Just as Cruz enters the stairwell from the interior door, Cruz turns and fires and hits Coach Feist twice in the chest, killing him. Coach Feist was 37 years old. He died of his wounds right there outside that west stairwell door. Cruz then goes up to the 2nd floor and goes up on the west stairwell to the 2nd floor looking for more targets. Now, the students and teachers on the 2nd floor had heard the shots from the 1st floor. The defendant fired 70, I want to say that again. The defendant fired 70 shots on the 1st floor and 2 shots in the west stairwell at Coach Feist. You talk about finger tapping, and you heard it. He fired 70 shots on the 1st floor. So he goes up to the 2nd floor. The teachers and students had heard the sound, so now they're taking precautions, a code red, for an active shooter. So they turn off the lights, they get away from the door, they're hiding. And as you know, there's 10 classrooms on the 1st floor, 10 on the 3rd floor, and 2nd floor, 10 on the 3rd floor. So the 10 classrooms on the 2nd floor, 3 of those classrooms were empty. The defendant fired 6 shots on the 2nd floor. He couldn't find any targets. He fired into classroom 1231, which was empty, and 1234, which was empty. So he goes the length of the hallway after firing the 6 shots, and now he's at the east stairwell. So he goes up the east stairwell. Now, the students and teachers on the 3rd floor they heard some noises, but they weren't as distinct as what the teachers and students heard on the second floor. So they, at 2:22:38, the fire alarm went off. And remember, we talked about the evidence was that the dust from the ceiling tiles, because of the percussion of the defendant firing his weapon on the first floor 70 times, caused the ceiling tiles to pop up. And when the ceiling tiles popped up, dust came down. And you saw it on the video, the dust. It looks like smoke. So the camera system doesn't know the difference between dust and smoke, so it sounded at 2:22:38. So the teachers and the students on the third floor, when they hear the fire alarm at 2:22:38, they evacuate. They didn't hear the shots like the students and teachers on the second floor. So and as you know, there's a stairwell on the east side and there's a stairwell on the west side, so the students and teachers started to evacuate. But once the students started to evacuate, they heard the shots on the second floor, and you saw it on the video, they all come running back. And there's a mishmash, everybody running and trying to get somewhere. Meanwhile, the defendant is coming up the east stairwell. And as he comes up the east stairwell and opens the door, the first classroom on the east side, on the north part of the hallway, is 1256, and that's Scott Beagle's classroom. He was a geography teacher. So he is holding the door open, and you can see it on the video. He's holding the door open for his students so they can get into the classroom. And the teacher next to him in 1255 was Stacy Lapel. She was the English teacher right next to him. She's also holding the door open for students, not just their students, any students to run into the classrooms for safety. So when Cruz comes in out of the stairwell, he fires 4 shots into the back of 35-year-old Scott Beagle and kills him. Scott Beagle died right there. He also fired and wounded Stacy Lapel. The defendant continues to fire down the hallway. He hits and wounds Meadow Pollock and Carol Ogren, and they run and they hide in the alcove of classroom 1249. He shoots and wounds Anthony Borges, Kyle Lehman, and Marian Kabachenko, who were in the hallway. He continues to move west, and as he's moving west, he fires again. This time, the students are running to the west stairwell. He hits in the leg Joaquin Oliver, who runs into the alcove of the men's restroom on the north side of the hallway. He shoots and he hits Peter Wang, who falls on the southwest corner right next to the west stairwell door. And he hits and kills Jamie Guttenberg. Jamie Guttenberg is running to the west stairwell. And as she runs, he shoots her and hits her in the back. In the back, right near her neck. It severs her spinal cord. I don't know if you remember Dr. Osborne's testimony. She falls through the west stairwell door and falls onto the third floor landing on the west stairwell. The defendant continues west, and you'll see it on the video. He turns and aims into Meadow Pollock and Carol Ogren. Carol Ogren was shot 3 times. She's 14 years old, and she died of her wounds. Meadow Pollock was shot 6 times, and she was in the alcove with Kara. She was 18 years old. She died of her wounds. Then the defendant goes over to the men's restroom alcove where Joaquin Oliver is, and he fires into Joaquin Oliver. Joaquin Oliver was shot 4 times, 17 years old. He died of his wounds. Remember the testimony of Dr. Tops, the medical examiner? He said there was a defensive wound, that the bullet went through the palm of his right hand, exited the back of his right hand, and entered into Joaquin Oliver's left temple and killed him. Defendant then leaves from the restroom on the west side and proceeds down to Peter White. And you saw in the video that Peter Wang was laying on the ground, and remember when the kids were running out, students were running out, you can see him moving. So when he's laying on the ground, what? He's still alive, right? Because he's moving. Cruz walks up to Peter Wang and shoots him in the head 4 times. Peter Wang was shot 12 times. And you remember what the defendant told, I think it was Dr. Denney, could have been Dr. Scott, that when he shot Peter Wang, his head blew up like a watermelon. Remember that? He was shot 4 times in the head. Peter Wang died of his wounds. The defendant then goes over and he looks out the west stairwell door, that little window in the door. And then he doesn't go down the stairwell. He goes into 1240. He shoots the glass out, shatters the glass, reaches in, opens the door, and now he's in 1240, the teacher's lounge. Why is he in 1240? Because of what I was talking about before. The west windows look over the west part of the campus, and the south windows look over the south part of the campus. On the south side, there's a courtyard. On the west, there's walkways and there's parking lots. The defendant fired his AR-15 5 times out of the west window and 5 times out of the south window, looking for targets. He left a 40-round empty magazine on the desk in 1240, and he left 1240 after firing those 10 rounds. So, up on the 3rd floor, he fired 51 rounds in the 3rd floor, and another 10 rounds in 1240. So that's 61 rounds he fired on the 3rd floor. The 10 in 1240 and 51, outside of 1240. So you got a total of 139 rounds that the defendant fired in the 1200 building on February the 14th, 2018. So he goes out of 1240. He passes the body of Peter Wang, opens up the door. It's on the 3rd floor landing. Laying there dead is Jamie Guttenberg. He takes off his vest, lays it on the 3rd floor landing, puts his rifle down next to it, and he runs down the stairs and exits the west doors to the 1200 building. He runs south and then west. He runs west and then south by the tennis courts. And as he's running south, what does he do? He blends in with all the students and the teachers who are evacuated. Oh, he's got his JROTC polo shirt on, blended right in. As a matter of fact, he bumps into Nicolette Muccietta. Remember her testimony? She sees him, and she hadn't seen him in a while, but she knew him from school, and she says to him, "Hi." He responds, "Hi." She says to him, "Plans for college?" Defendant responds, "Somewhere in Florida." Then he walks to the Walmart, to the Subway that's inside of Walmart, gets an icy. You saw the video. Calmly gets an icy. In fact, he left the tip. Then he leaves there, leaves Walmart, goes on Coral Ridge Drive, and he goes to McDonald's. And I think you remember the testimony, I think it was Officer Leonard. The McDonald's is about 1 point, from where he was arrested. McDonald's is 1.8 miles from where he was arrested. He was arrested on Wyndham Lakes Boulevard South. So he goes down to McDonald's, and sitting in McDonald's at a table is John Wilford. Just so happens, John Wilford is the brother of Madeline Wilford, who was shot and wounded in classroom 1213. But the defendant didn't know John Wilford, and John Wilford didn't know the defendant, but the defendant walks up to him as he's sitting in the booth, and he starts talking, and he asks John Wilford for a ride, and John Wilford says, "I can't give you a ride, my mom's picking me up." And sure enough, the mother came, they both get up, John Wilford walks out, the defendant follows him, John Wilford gets in his mom's car, the defendant crosses Coral Ridge Drive into Wyndham Lakes and walks around. So Officer Leonard spots him and arrests him at approximately 12:40 p.m. So the place of arrest was 1.8 miles from the McDonald's and 2.9 miles from Marjory Stoneman Douglas, and he's placed under arrest. So when crime scene from the Broward Sheriff's Office comes, they obviously find, remember they found the video with the cell phone videos on it in the east stairwell. They find the Cabela bag in the east stairwell. Well, they also find, obviously, the rifle, the 5.56 Smith & Wesson M&P 15. Had a round in the chamber, as you probably know with a semi-automatic, once a round goes out the barrel, another one pops in. So there was a round in the chamber, and there were 23 rounds still in the magazine. And the magazine, that was the magazine with a swastika on either side of it. Well, in that magazine, there were 23 rounds. Of the 23 rounds, guess what? 11 of them were tracer rounds. So, and in the vest, there were 5 magazines. There was a 40-round magazine, in the tactical vest in one of the pouches. There was a 40-round magazine that was fully loaded with 40 rounds. There were 3 30-round magazines that were fully loaded with 30 rounds. And there was another 30-round magazine that had 29 rounds in it. And in one of those magazines, there was another 9 tracer rounds. Now, remember George Bello? He was the firearms expert. He says, I can tell a tracer round when it's full because of the orange tip and how it's manufactured. But once it's fired, I can't tell if any of the casings that were found, of the 139 casings, if any of them were tracer rounds. But there were 11 tracer rounds in the magazine that was in the gun, and another 9 tracer rounds that were in one of the magazines that was found in the vest. The police also found 3 magazines on the first floor, an empty 10-round magazine, an empty 30-round magazine, and another magazine in the hallway that was a 30-round magazine that had 9 rounds in it that hadn't been fired. On the third floor, there was an empty 30-round magazine in the third floor hallway, and you can see in the video him reloading on the third floor. And there was a 40-round empty magazine in the teacher's lounge at 1240. So that was an empty 40 round. So there were 5 empty 5 magazines. 4 of them were empty. 1 had 9 rounds in it. And of course, there was 23 rounds actually 24, because 1 in the chamber in the rifle that he left behind. So he carried out his plan. And his plan was, and he told everybody what his plan was. They found his phone, and the cell phone with 3 cell phone videos on it. And the one that he made on February the 11th, 2018, hello, my name is Nick. I'm going to be the next school shooter of 2018. My goal is to kill at least 20 people with an AR and a couple of tracer rounds. I think I can get it done. Location, Stoneman Douglas in Parkland, Florida. It's going to be a big event. And when you see me on the news, you'll know who I am. Haha, you're all going to die. Can't wait. Can't wait. That was his plan. He carried it out. So you're going to see that in these proceedings, and we talked about it, aggravating and mitigating circumstances. The state is limited of the aggravating factors that they can rely on by Florida statutes. And in this case, we're limited to 7 aggravating factors. And before I discuss the aggravating factors, Aaron, I'd like to play the video, please.
This is not to be published to the public,
Yeah,
correct?
not to the public.
Not to be published to the public.
Right. Yes, thank you, Ron. just want you to see how tactical and how purposeful his actions are. you show the chest wound of Gina Montaldo, please?
And this is not for the public viewing either?
No, Your Honor.
Okay. Okay.
Okay, thank you, Aaron. So, aggravating factors. Florida statutes say what aggravating factors the state can use. We're limited in this case to 7 aggravating factors. So I'd like to go over them with you. First, I'll give you a list, and then I'll go into a little bit more detail. The first one, the defendant has been previously convicted of another capital felony or a felony involving the use or threat of violence to another person. So, in this case, simultaneous convictions. So, the defendant has pled guilty to 17 first-degree murders, a capital felony. So, for each victim, the other 16 can be aggravating factors for that victim. And the 17 attempted first-degree murders of the 17 surviving victims, they're contemporaneous, but they can also be considered as previous convictions. So for each victim, there's 17 attempted first-degree murders that could be to aggravate the offense, right? And then, if you'll recall, on November the 13th, 2018, 10 months after the defendant was arrested for the murders, he attacked Sergeant Deputy Beltran in the jail. Remember that? Tried to take his taser. You saw the video, and if you want to see the video again, you can. You take it back to the jury room. How he ran up and attacked him, took his taser away, took his weapon away. So there's 3 convictions you can consider for that. Attempted aggravated battery of a law enforcement officer as 1. Battery on a law enforcement officer is 2. And taking means of protection from a law enforcement officer is 3. So for each victim, you have the 16 other capital murders, the 17 attempted first-degree murders, and the 3 offenses that I just mentioned involving the attack on Sergeant Beltran on November 13, 2018. Okay? So that's the first aggravated. Previously convicted of a prior capital felony or a felony by the use or threaten the use of force to another person. The second one is the defendant knowingly created a great risk of death to many persons. That speaks for itself. The third one is that the first-degree murder was especially heinous, atrocious, or cruel. The fourth one is the first-degree murder was cold, calculated, and premeditated. The next one is that the first-degree murder was committed to disrupt or hinder a lawful governmental function to which the functioning of the school. That a victim of the first-degree murder was an appointed public official. And in this case, you have Scott Beagle, who was a geography teacher for the school board, who was shot in front of his classroom, 1256. Christopher Hickson, who was the athletic director and a coach, and also a campus monitor. And Aaron Weiss, who was a coach and also a campus monitor. So the killing of a public official during the course of their public duties is applicable to those 3: Scott Beagle, Aaron Weiss, and Christopher Hickson. They were shot down during the course of their official duties. The other one is that during the course of a burglary. You say, what are you talking about? Well, when you enter somewhere where you have no permission, campus to commit an offense, to it murder. That's a burglary. So there are 7 aggravating factors for you can consider. And remember, we've talked about this, that it is not a counting process, it's a weighing process. And each one of the aggravators and each one of any mitigators, you're going to have to weigh. Some are going to have no weight, some are going to have some weight, some are going to have middle weight, some are going to have a lot of weight, and some are going to have great weight. So it's a weighing process. It's not a counting process. So first, I'd like to talk about the first aggravating factor. The defendant was previously convicted of a capital felony or another felony involving threat or use of violence. As I said, let's just take Gina Montaldo or any one of the people who were murdered. The other murders of the other 16 can be used as aggravation of their murder. So Scott Beagle, 16. Meadow Pollock, 16. And you go down the line. So there's 16. And the 17 attempted first-degree murders of the victims who survived, like William Colton and Madeline Wilford, all those can be used, 17. And then the 3 felonies with Beltran. So there are like 36 felonies. So even though it's one aggravator previously convicted, you have to weigh each one of these aggravators. And some aggravators you're going to find way more than other aggravators. And this aggravator has 36. This is one heavy aggravating factor. 17 people were killed, 17 people were attempted to be killed, and the 3 felonies on Sergeant Beltran when the defendant was in jail. That is one heavy aggravating factor. The next one, that the defendant knowingly created a great risk of death to many persons during the homicide. Well, he murdered 17. He wounded another 17, and he was trying for more. So there's no question that that aggravating factor has been proven beyond any reasonable doubt, just like the first aggravating factor was proven beyond any reasonable doubt. And the third aggravator, the first-degree murder was especially heinous, atrocious, or cruel. Cruel! It's like I said, it's unrelentlessly cruel, heinous, and atrocious. The people there, and you saw the video again, and I discussed it. The people were out in the opening. He went and finished them off. You saw him pointing, not casually either, aiming and killing the people out in the open. He was shooting the kids in the classroom that were hiding or attempting to hide. So you have Gina and Luke and Martin who were in front of 1215. You have Kara and Meadow hiding in the alcove in 1249. Joaquin Oliver in the men's restroom alcove. Peter Wang laying on the ground. And you have in 1216 Alex, trying to get up to hide. He got shot twice in the chest. Elena Petty and Alyssa Alfredette were hiding when they were shot down and killed. In 1214, you have Helen Ramsey and Nicholas Durrett, who were hiding when they were killed. They all knew what was going on, what was going to happen, what was happening here, the nature, the danger, the deadly nature of the situation. And Carmen Shentrup, who was shot in 1213, and the kids that are all running on the 3rd floor. Jamie Guttenberg running to the west stairwell to escape. Peter Wang running. Joaquin Oliver running. And Kara and Meadow hiding. Heinous, atrocious, or cruel beyond any reasonable doubt. The other one, was it cold, calculated, and premeditated? Well, We talked about that. This guy researched it. He even researched a high school shooting in Finland, Las Vegas, Virginia Tech, Columbine, Charlottesville, the McDonald's, Aurora, Las Vegas. He researched it. He planned it. We went over all the details. How long does it take a cop to respond to a school shooting? The bail schedule. How am I going to transport this? How am I going to transport that? Got to get a lot of ammunition. He fired 139 rounds, and he had plenty left. He had a 40 round that was fully loaded. He had three 30 rounds that were fully loaded, another 30 round that only had 29 rounds in it. So he was prepared. He went through, he did the research, he did the planning, and he carried it out. I submit to you that that aggravating factor of cold, calculated, and premeditated, highly premeditated, is proven beyond any reasonable doubt. The next one is to hinder or disrupt a school function. I'll eventually be able to say that. There's no question that's proven beyond a reasonable doubt. He went into to the campus in the 1200 building and was shooting every target he could find. And he definitely disrupted and hindered a governmental function, to wit, school functioning. And then the next one is that Scott Beagle and Aaron Feist and Christopher Hickson were campus monitors and coaches. Christopher Hickson and Aaron Feist, and Scott Beagle was a geography teacher working for the school board. They were appointed officials in the course of their duties, and they were shot down. So that aggravator is applicable to only them. And then the last one is that this was during the course of a burglary. It may sound unusual to you, but when someone enters a place without permission to commit a crime, it's a burglary. Okay? So there, the seven aggravating factors that I submit to you have been proven beyond a reasonable doubt and outweigh any mitigation about anything about the defendant's background or character. It's a weighing process. It's not a counting process. So I want to go over with you now some of the, and the defense can present anything, any mitigators that they think is relevant for you all to consider. So I'd like to go over some of them with you right now. And as you know, the defense stated, remember we're picking a jury, that mitigation is not a defense, mitigation is not an explanation, and mitigation is not justification. I agree with that.
Mr. Zach, I'm sorry to interrupt you. We have a few people that need to use the restroom.
Okay.
So we're going to take a 15-minute restroom break. I apologize for interrupting. Ladies and gentlemen, do not discuss the case. Leave your notepads behind. And let's try to keep it as close to 15 minutes as possible. I fully understand that there are 22 of you, so we're in recess for 15 minutes. The jurors have been excused. I realize it's a process to shuffle everyone in and out, but when I get a note And are both sides ready to bring the jurors in so the state can continue with their closing?
State's ready or not?
Yes, Your Honor.
Okay. Jurors are entering. Okay, the jurors are present. Everyone else may be seated. State, whenever you're ready, you may continue.
Thank you, Your Honor. I think I left off, we're going to talk about mitigation, but I want to stress again that it's a weighing process, not a counting process. I talked about 7 aggravating factors. 5 aggravating factors are applicable to all 17 victims. 2 aggravating factors that hinder or disrupt the school public function, school function, is applicable to Scott Beagle, Aaron Weiss, and Christopher Hickson. And appointed public official is also only applicable to Scott Beagle, Aaron Weiss, and Christopher Hickson. Okay. So again, weighing, not accounting. So I'm going to go over some of the mitigating circumstances that the defendant has proposed. And again, they can propose, and they're unlimited as to anything about the defendant's character or background. The first one I think they're listing is that the defendant is a human being. The next one is that the defendant was a diligent and conscientious employee and had a good work history. I agree with that. He worked at Dollar Tree. He did a good job, had a good work history, but it goes to show that when he wanted to, he can control his behavior. when he wanted to. And he controlled himself just like at West Glades. Remember Carrie On, his 8th grade teacher? She said when Mr. Lindsay, the assistant principal, was in the class, he behaved himself. Remember? She said that her testimony was he could control himself. And it's like Dr. Denney was talking about. Remember Dr. Denney, the neuropsychologist, was saying, somebody who's truly mentally ill, doesn't matter who's sitting in the room, could be a group of police officers, they can't control themselves. But a person with antisocial personality can and does control themselves. The next one is the mitigator that they're proposing is that the birth mother smoked during pregnancy. So whether Ms. Woodard smoked during pregnancy or not did not turn Nikolas Cruz into a mass murderer. The next one was that the birth mother, Brenda Woodard, used drugs during pregnancy. The testimony of Carolyn Deakins and Miss Woodard's daughter, Danielle Woodard, is kind of contradicted by some of the scientific evidence. You know, the Meconian test came back negative, and every other drug test, remember Dr. Scott's testimony, every other drug test during pregnancy came back negative. And of course, you know, one of your duties as a juror is to weigh the credibility of the witnesses. And I suggest to you, Ms. Deakins, remember she said on the arrest in June 8th, 1998, that the drugs were in the back seat. They weren't in her pocket. If you can remember Mr. Marcus's cross-examination, and the police report indicated that in truth and in fact, the 5 crack rocks were in Ms. Deakins' pocket, and that she had some resentment to Brenda Woodard. So you can weigh that in evaluating someone's testimony, as you can evaluate that Danielle Woodward's lawyer is being paid for. She has a benefit of lawyer that's being paid for by the defendant's brother. The next one was that the birth mother did not obtain prenatal care. Dr. Scott testified he went through the records, and several times he indicated when Miss Woodard went in for prenatal care. And the fact of the matter that the baby, and you can go through the birth records, they're in evidence, and Dr. Scott and Dr. Denney did go through them. The baby, the defendant, was born healthy and taken right to the prenatal nursery and not anywhere else. You may recall too on jury selection, or no, it was opening statement, that the defense said that the baby had to be resuscitated. Remember that? Well, the birth records indicate, and Dr. Scott and Dr. Denney testified that the baby did not have to be resuscitated. Another one, that Linda Cruz, the mother of the defendant, abused alcohol. Well, none of Linda Cruz's friends believed that she was an alcoholic or she abused alcohol. They believed, and a lot of witnesses testified, she was a loving, devoted, and caring mother who tried her best. The next mitigator is the defendant struggled academically throughout his life. Well, records will show that when he was at Cross Creek, and yes, it was more structured, but when he wanted to, and he applied himself, he got A's and B's because he was motivated. He wanted to go to Marjory Stoneman Douglas High School. So he was partially mainstreamed, and he did so well that he was fully mainstreamed. And he did well at Marjory Stoneman Douglas High School for a while until his girlfriend broke up with him, and then he went back to his old ways. And during elementary school and middle school, he didn't have good grades. He didn't have good grades because he got suspended. He didn't devote himself to the learning process. He intimidated other students, and he didn't participate. So he got bad grades. That's what happens when you don't engage in learning and you don't participate. And it's as Amy Nash, remember there was testimony, she didn't testify, but she was the ESE specialist, and she asked him, she worked at West Glades Middle School, why don't you like school? Because it's boring. I'd rather be out on the streets killing animals and setting fires. The next one, the defendant continues to educate himself while incarcerated. And yeah, he did. It's like Dr. Denney said, real world actions are better than any testing. Well, he did. I mean, he had, and the clips that were played that with Dr. Scott and Dr. Denney, you can take them back with you, and I suggest you do and look at them. He knew about the Ukraine-Russian conflict. He even had suggestions for Putin and how to resolve it. He knew more about Putin than most people. When he got married, where he lived, where he was before he became president. He retained that information and was able to relate it, long time later. And he also did, the drawings that he did that the deputy found in his cell. Look at those. I mean, he reproduced from memory pictures of weapons and the school property. Take a look at that. It's pretty good that you can do that from memory. The next one was the defendant had neurological and intellectual deficits. Dr. Denney, the neuropsychologist, testified for the state. And again, Dr. Denney, if you'll recall, is one of 7 professionals in the world that are both board certified in neuropsychology and forensic psychology. And he says, and he testified, that the defendant does not have any neurocognitive deficits. And both Dr. Denney and Dr. Scott did not diagnose the defendant with any of the disorders that come under FASD, whether, and that's fetal alcohol spectrum disorder, whether it's NDPAE or ARND. They said that wasn't part of their diagnosis. They didn't feel that was applicable. They felt he had antisocial personality and borderline personality disorder, and he was malingering. FASD and NDPAE and ARND certainly did not cause the defendant to abuse animals, to hate women, to have racist obsessions, or to cause him to murder 14 children and 3 of their caretakers on February the 14th, 2018. Obviously, the defendant has planning and reasoning abilities, because you saw that, all the planning and the research. How many people know about Jokelin High School in Finland, or all these mass murders? And the testimony certainly established that his testing and his performance and his abilities were at least consistent with someone with an 83 IQ. And he certainly is able to retain things, memory-wise, and replicate them. And he also did well, you remember the testimony at the off-duty campus learning centers when he left Marjory Stoneman Douglas. So again, those clips are available for you to look at, and you can judge for yourself. And also, remember the testimony, and I'm sure you will, of Dr. Scott and Dr. Denney, when they said the defendant exaggerates his symptoms and he malingers and he doesn't give his best effort. And they testified about these following tests: that he malingered, didn't do his best effort, or exaggerated. The structured inventory of malingered symptomatology, the reliable digit span, nonverbal medical symptom validity test, the Minnesota multiphasic personality inventory, and Dr. Denney and Dr. Scott said it went off the charts. You couldn't even judge any of the other categories because of the exaggeration. The personality assessment inventory, the clinical assessment attention deficit, battery for health improvement, memory complaints inventory, trauma symptom inventory, the Ray complex figure test, and of course, the finger tapping test. You remember Dr. Connor, he was the neuropsychologist, testified for the defense. 66 of the subtests that were scored, he didn't put on his graph. And of the 66 that he didn't put on his graph, 11 of those subtests dealt with executive functioning. 11 of those tests dealt with executive functioning, that domain, remember on the graph? Executive functioning, and those 11 tests were all average. They were all average, and they were not graphs, but they were on Dr. Denney's graph. He graphed them all 145. The next one, the defense is offering, is the Department of Children and Families in September of 2016 said that he was a vulnerable adult due to mental illness. Well, that was the allegation, that he was a vulnerable adult due to mental illness. That was the allegation. The final finding was that the defendant, no need for further referrals or services. There are 3 pages that are in evidence. And Aaron, if you put up the first page, if you could, where it lists the allegation.
Mr. Sachs, does this need to be private?
No, this is fine.
Okay, so this can be for everyone.
Well, unless the defense doesn't want it, because it's Children and Family Services.
We have no objection.
Okay, that's fine. Okay. Okay. Everybody see it? So, see where it says allegation narrative? Right. Everybody see that? Okay, that's the allegation. And then the conclusion is on page 3. No implications for V's, that's the defendant's safety, based on recommended disposition narrative, as the victim resides with mother, receives in-home services from Henderson Mental Health, and attends school as well. No other referrals or services were needed. You can review the whole document. It's evidence. I encourage you to do so. And you can look at it and read it, in your leisure, okay? Okay. So that was the allegation. That wasn't the final conclusion. I just read you the final conclusion. The next one, the defendant, it's proposed by the defense, was not correctly diagnosed as a child and therefore did not receive appropriate interventions. Well, you heard from a lot of the board-certified professionals that had treated the defendant as a child, Dr. Nagin, Dr. Kravitz. They said, look, we were treating the symptoms. Doesn't matter what you call it. We were treating the symptoms. And the testimony from even defense witnesses was that Linda Cruz was a loving, caring mother who did her best. And she got different diagnosis because she did not give up on the defendant. She took him all over for a different diagnosis to find out why he was behaving like he was. The next one is the defendant was bullied by his peers and his brother. Well, from the testimony and the records, who appears to be the aggressor, even in preschool and in elementary school, pushing other kids around? The defendant. Who was pushing kids in the hall at West Glades Middle School? The defendant. And let me tell you something. If you have I hate or FNs and a swastika on your backpack and you're walking around high school, who's the bully? And as far as his brother, brothers fight. Brothers fight. The next one is that the defendant has the ability to succeed in a highly structured Florida state prison. Well, he was in the Broward County Jail, and on November 13, 2018, he attacked a deputy, Sergeant Beltran. So that wasn't so great. And then in May, they found 666 written on his cell wall. I would not call that potential for success. The next one, that the defendant was raised in a verbally abusive home. Well, from the testimony, the evidence, and the records that I remember, he was the one that was verbally abusive in his home. As a matter of fact, the YouTube comment, "I punch my mom, dumb bitch, I say," that would indicate that, he's the one that's being abusive. And he grew up in a 4,500 square foot home in Parkland, Florida, had a swimming pool. And the mother took him from doctor to doctor, to counselor, to therapist. She never ignored him. She never neglected him. It appears that Linda Cruz had a good value system. The defendant had the ability to behave. He just didn't. It's kind of interesting. Danielle Woodward said, I forget who was asking her questions. I don't know if it was Mr. Marcus or maybe somebody from the defense. She wished she could have been raised in a 4,500 square foot home in Parkland. Then the next one, the defendant was sexually abused by a trusted peer. Well, again, take the clips back with you. Dr. Denney and Dr. Scott said when they asked him about it, he was 75 to 80% sure it happened. I don't know, if you're going to be abused, I would think you would be a little bit more than 75 to 80% sure that it happened. And he said he heard it on the news and that his brother could confirm that. His brother did not verify that allegation. And I'd like for you to keep in mind the diagnosis of Dr. Denney and Dr. Scott of malingering. The next one is the defendant has remorse. Well, on November 13, 2018, he attacked Sergeant Raymond Beltran in the jail. I don't think that shows remorse. And if you remember, there was testimony about Scarlett Lewis. Scarlett Lewis was the lady who lost a child at Sandy Hook massacre. And she came down here to meet with the defendant, and her goal in life, and it's a good goal, is to prevent, future mass murders. Poor woman went through a lot. So after the defendant met with her, and they both said they love each other, he goes back to the jail and he writes, you saw, and please take it back with you, his notes and his drawings. He's talking about future mass murders and how to do it and how much it's going to cost and how to kill people. I wouldn't call that being remorseful. So, in talking about mitigators and talking about aggravators and testing, and I agree with this, that, and Dr. Denney, said this, that real world actions trump any testing, right? So the first one is visual spatial I'd like to talk to you about, okay? So you can look at the video about the defendant's visual spatial ability. Take the video, the school surveillance we just played, take it back. See if you think he has any problems with visual spatial. And then, how about this? He wants to be on the ROTC marksman team. In order to be on the marksmanship team, you have to hit a target first the size of a quarter from 10 meters. 10 meters is 32 plus feet away. It's hard for me to see at 32 feet, let alone hit a target the size of a quarter. You have to do that 3 times in a row. Then if you do that, then you have to hit a target the size of a nickel 3 times in a row. And then if you do that, you have to hit the target the size of a dime 3 times in a row. And I submit to you, someone that can do that certainly doesn't appear to have any kind of visual spatial problems. And he's also got a badge for sharpshooter. The other one I want to talk about is about executive function. One of his YouTube comments, and I mentioned it before, I love to see the family suffer. Remember that? So you're asking me, what's that to do with executive function? I'll tell you, because it's not only looking to inflict pain, fear, and death to the murder victim. You're anticipating how that pain, fear, and death on the murder victim is going to affect the families. He's anticipating what his action in murder is going to do to the families. He's thinking ahead, just like playing chess. So that's why I feel that that is really a good measure of executive function. Dr. Jones testified for the defense, and he said, although he didn't know anything about this offense or any of the defendants searching, prior mass shootings or what happened, that he felt that planning, the lack of ability to plan is a hallmark of any of the disorders under FASD. Well, one of the hallmarks of this case is the ability to plan. And what he did in planning it, he not only planned it, he researched other mass shootings, he accumulated all kinds of apparatus, things to do and things to say. It was intensive planning. It was detailed. How long does it take a cop to respond to a school shooting? All that he did. He has the ability to plan and plan well. He accomplished his plan. And he has, obviously, the ability to reason. And I mentioned Dr. Scott. Dr. Scott is board certified in general psych. He's a medical doctor. He's board certified in general psychiatry, adult and adolescent psychiatry, addiction psychiatry, and forensic psychiatry. And I mentioned Dr. Denney. He's one of the 7 neuropsychologists, professionals, and they're both board certified in neuropsychology and forensic psychology, And they both, their opinion was that the defendant has antisocial personality disorder, borderline personality disorder, and they diagnosed malingering. They did not diagnose him with any of the disorders that come under FASD, NDPAE, or ARND. They felt that it's antisocial personality and not a mental disease. He has the ability to control himself. He can control himself, and he does control his behavior. His actions are voluntary and volitional. They testified that the defendant, because of his antisocial personality, doesn't take blame, and he shifts responsibility. For instance, Linda Cruz, the defendant's mother, died, passed away, November the 1st, 2017. The defendant had been planning this mass murder long before Miss Cruz passed away. Back in June of 2017, he's looking up mass murders, the McDonald's in San Diego. So one of the things, an example they were saying of him shifting blame was, if my mother didn't die, I wouldn't have done this. Yet, he writes on YouTube, on August 11, 2017, I punched my mom, dumb bitch, I say. And as I said, long before his mother passed away, he was planning to be a mass murderer. I would have not done this if someone loved me. I would have not done this if someone hugged me. And I would have not shot 2 of the girls and 1 of the campus monitors if they didn't give me a nasty look. There's a real shift for you. There is no brain damage. There is damage to his personality and to his character. And hate is not a mental disorder. And Dr. Denney and Dr. Scott testified that hate is part of antisocial personality. So let's look at hate here. There was a swastika on the defendant's boot. when he was arrested. Remember at one time he said to somebody he didn't know what it meant, what a swastika meant? So on his backpack it says, F ends and a swastika. You don't think he knew what it meant? He had a swastika on his boot, and you can take back with you his comments and what his search is for. He was searching for, remember, a Nazi flag. He wishes the Nazis won the war. You mean to tell me he doesn't know what a swastika means? There's a swastika on both sides of the magazine in the his rifle that he left on the third floor landing, the 5.56 M&P 15 Smith & Wesson AR-15 style rifle. And like I said, on the backpack. And then you look at the hateful racial comments he's made on YouTube, his hatred of women, his animal abuse, and his search for child pornography. And I'm not going to go over it. It's in evidence. You can look for his searches for little girl pornography. And then also examine what was found in his jail on May 8th of 2022, where the deputy found the 666 on the wall, all his drawings about encouraging and describing future mass murders. Dr. Denney, Dr. Scott said all that is antisocial personality. He can control it. It's not a mental disease. Then they gave examples of, they felt he was malingering. And I think a perfect example, and you heard it, I think Mr. Marcus played the audio tape of the defendant when he was firing on the first floor of the 1200 building, how rapidly he fired his gun. And you talk about finger tapping. So I think, and they said that was a good example of malingering, that finger tapping test. Another example is that he has a manipulative personality, not only with Scarlett Lewis. Remember, he goes back into jail after saying they love each other and they want to stop mass murders, and he's describing future mass murders and how to do it, how much it's going to cost, and how to kill people. He can control that. And Carrie Ann, I mentioned it before, she was his 8th grade middle school teacher. And what did she say? That it was all about him. What he wants and when he wants it, it's all about him. He can control himself. And he certainly controlled himself, she said, when Mr. Lindsay, the assistant principal, was in the room. We talk about, decisions, and you have to make a decision, on the aggravators and the mitigators. And the decision, you're looking for the right decision. And I submit to you that the right decision is a decision fortified by truth and justice. It takes into account the facts, the law, and the truth. It's the right decision for the right reason. And the right reason does not ignore the law or the justice that it brings. So, the defendant had a plan, and we discussed it. He carried it out. Trace arounds, you all know my name. He wanted to be known. That was the goal of his plan, not just to kill at least 20 people, but when you see me on the news, you'll know who I am. Antisocial personality. Dr. Denney asked the defendant, and you saw the clip, anything else you want to tell me? Yeah. Why did it on Valentine's Day? Why did you do it on Valentine's Day? I wanted to ruin it for others. Dr. Scott asked the defendant, why'd you stop shooting? Couldn't find anyone else to kill. Well, there's 17 individuals that were murdered. and you have to make 17 individual decisions. And I submit to you that the evidence and the testimony prove beyond any reasonable doubt the 7 aggravating factors. The 5 that are applicable to all 17 victims, and the 2 aggravating factors that were applicable just to Scott Beagle, Aaron Feiss, and Christopher Hickson. And those aggravating factors, remember, it's a weighing process, not a counting process. And prior convictions for capital offense knowingly cause great for fear of death of other people, heinous, atrocious, cruel, cold, calculated, and premeditated. They're all really, really, really heavy aggravators, and they outweigh any mitigation at all. They are so heavy in weight. So I submit to you that the aggravating factors are proven beyond a reasonable doubt, and that those aggravating factors outweigh by a ton any mitigating circumstances. And the appropriate sentences for Gina Montaldo, for Alex Schechter, for Luke Hoyer, for Martin Duque Aquilano, for Elena Petty, for Alyssa Alfadette, for Helena Ramsey, for Nicholas Durrett, for Carmen Shentrup, for Christopher Hickson, for Aaron Feiss, for Jamie Guttenberg, for Scott Beagle, for Kara Lockman, for Meadow Pollock, for Joaquin Oliver, and for Peter Wang. The appropriate sentence for Nikolas Cruz is the death penalty. Thank you.
Thank you, Steve. Ladies and gentlemen, at this time, we're going to take an early lunch break, as opposed to taking a break and then starting with the defense closing just before lunchtime. So it's 11:15 now. I'm going to ask if you please be back at 12:45, which is 11:20 now, so it gives you just a little bit less than an hour and a half. You could please be back at 12:45 so that we can begin with the defense closing. Other than that, remember the rules. I know you all remember them. Do not, you can probably tell me yourselves, do not discuss the case, do not speak to anyone about the case. If anyone tries jurors have been excused. Ms. McNeil, you indicated you needed 15 minutes to set up. If you can use the lunch break to do that, please. Other than that, we're in recess until 12:45. In other words, I'm hoping that you don't need an hour and a half lunch and 15 minutes. I didn't think you did, but I just wanted to make it clear. If you want to do that now, or if you want to come back at 12:30, that's fine too. You want to do it now?
Yes.
Sure. Other than that, we're in recess until 12:45. Thank you.